Welcome, and thank you everyone for attending our webinar. The focus of this webinar is how to transition from DevOps to DevSecOps. My name is Shane Parfit, Senior Manager of Product Marketing and Marketing Services here at Security Compass, based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Also on the line, we have Altaz Villani, Director of Research for Security Compass, who will be our presenter today. So thank you, Altaz. For this webinar, we will keep the audio lines muted, but feel free to type any questions into the chat and we'll try to address them as we go. We'll also try to open up the audio lines at the end of the presentation for any questions that you might have. So we'll get started, but first, for those of you who don't know much about us, a little bit about our company. So Security Compass is a B2B company focused on application security. And what that means is that we help other companies make their software secure. And we do that mostly by focusing on building security in during the development and deployment process. We have 3 business units that are all focused on that goal. The company started out as a group of application security consultants that is now known as our advisory group. This business unit performs a variety of services for many large clients, most notably pen testing and vulnerability assessments, but there are also many other services that they perform. And they're also able to help organizations develop AppSec programs that work with Agile and DevOps methods. In the early days, as these consultants worked with large enterprises, they noticed some recurring needs and pain points of almost all their early clients, which gave birth to the other 2 business units within Security Compass. The first was our training group, which provides computer-based learning modules, which are focused on teaching developers how to write secure code. The second is SC Elements, our award-winning policy to procedure platform for security compliance. It does lightweight threat modeling, requirements management, and generally security risk and compliance management for technology development projects. So just a reminder that we will send a recording of this webinar to all those attending this webinar by the end of the week. We hope you learned something from this. And if you like this webinar or have any questions about the content, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can reply to the reminder emails or just send an email to info@securitycompass.com. And also, if there's any content or webinars that you'd like to see from us in the future, please let us know and we will consider it. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Altaz to get on with the actual planned content for this webinar. Take it away, Altaz.
Great, thank you, Shane. Appreciate it. And welcome everyone to our webinar today on scaling from DevOps to DevSecOps. Now, our intent today is really to explain the trends that we've seen over the last couple of years, where as a community, as an industry, we've transitioned from speaking purely about project level activities, like penetration testing, requirements gathering, and so on. We've actually moved on to program level activities where we now have to deal with multiple teams, multiple projects, and having to really now try to coordinate all of these activities in an environment where we have to move quickly, and at the same time we have to keep our software secure. So a little bit about myself real quick. As Shane mentioned, I'm the research director at Security Compass. Under my portfolio, we're focused on a number of different areas, including governance, secure DevOps, compliance, standards, privacy, and I'm currently involved in a number of different community groups, including the IEEE, SafeCode, and a bunch of other ones as well. And my interests are primarily really around collaboration, teaching, research. So please do feel free, reach out to me at any time. I would love to have a conversation with you. If you want to engage with us in some kind of a joint research initiative, I would be delighted. We've had some folks participate with us in that, and it's really been sort of a win-win situation for both sides. So please feel free to reach out at that point. Now, for today's webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the following outline. We're going to, first of all, discuss when we talk about DevSecOps, we're going to really talk about scaling it in terms of where are the problems? What are we seeing from a research perspective? And then secondly, we're going to show you what we've seen from our own research with regards to how are organizations and teams reacting to the problem. And we're basically going to see that there are some really reactive basically ideas that are emerging to help us manage this at a program level. We're then going to talk about gaps in the industry practices. And finally, we're going to look at how we improve going forward. And you'll see as we land at the end of this, the root of all of this is really based on a breakdown in the collaboration that needs to happen. And when I talk about collaboration here, I'm not really talking just at that project team level anymore. It's actually now at the program level, which means it's across different organizational teams. So we're now starting to reach into different business units. Previously, we were focused on reaching across different project units. So it would be, operations teams, development teams, testing teams, and so on. But now that we're at the program level, it's really dealing with it from the perspective of the development or DevOps teams, risk teams, compliance teams, and so it becomes an issue that becomes much broader within the organization. So when we took a look at the industry to try and see where problems exist at a very high level, as we conducted the research, as we spoke to individuals, we found that there are actually two different approaches to security out there. And again, I'm coming in from the mindset of really looking at it from an emergent perspective out of DevOps. Many organizations have assumed the position that DevOps is the direction they want to move in. So I'm just going to talk about how do we expand that DevOps mindset. So on the one hand, we've got security teams that are lagging their DevOps counterparts. So in essence, what's happening is security is essentially playing catch up now. And we see this when software gets released and we find that that software has security gaps that actually should very easily have been caught before this got released into production. This happens not just in the software domain, but we see it in the hardware domain. There are well-known examples of firewall manufacturers that have experienced similar kinds of things as well. And so on the other hand, on the bottom part of the screen is where we've got teams that have in fact already enabled security into their DevOps process. But the problem is security is perceived as actually getting in the way. So the DevSecOps process isn't actually smooth. And so with the pressure that's coming in to release more quickly, we end up really going quickly and then stopping, and then going quickly and stopping. Now, in both of these cases, security, unfortunately, is not really embedded directly into the DevOps process in a seamless way. And as we dig deeper into our presentation here, we're going to take a look and see what the root causes of these issues are. So when we look at a lot of the practices that we've got here, this is what's emerged from the perspective of practices that are being used today. These are really poor practices, and they're all really hitting at that program level. So for example, we have the use of immature automated deployment tools, where we've got teams that have disparate tools. These tools are not really connected together to form a seamless DevSecOps tool chain. One of the things that we strive for is that we would like to see that seamless integration. We would like to see the ability to go in there and report at any part of this life cycle, but this is not actually what's happening. We also see incorrect metrics being used. So for example, many times the emphasis is placed on output from really project-based activities still. Things like, let's say, code scanners what the output from the code scanners are, and that becomes indicative of whether or not we are actually running a secure program. But it's not really thinking in terms of what's the impact of that output to the overall program level teams. And so we're finding that there's a bit of a challenge in that we're really trying to move away from project-centric mindsets into something that's now at a higher level. We also see a lack of controlled collaboration. Now here, we really have an inherent conflict in the mindset. Let me explain that a little bit further. The typical DevOps mindset assumes that developers might in fact want access to production level data, but legally they may not be allowed to receive that data. We also have to control certain discussions which may disclose information that not everybody should hear. So we need to govern this collaboration. It's not everybody get in a room and you can say whatever you want to say. We also have lack of centralized coordination, which is typical in a program that's basically based at scale. Some of the organizations that we've spoken to have gradually decided that they would like to create something like a security champions program or a center of excellence or community of practice, something like that to kind of help bring this level of coordination. And then just kind of moving on, in many cases, there's an emphasis on speed of future releases over security. There's a lack of security throughout the entire process. And perhaps there's an initial assessment of security requirements, but not really having that thorough understanding of how to implement those security requirements. And finally, we have the lack of audit and control points, as we explained earlier. So we decided to take an overview of the landscape. This is always a good place to start. What's actually happening and where do gaps still exist today? Down the left-hand side, we have here a breakdown of the SDLC. And across the top, we looked at it from different perspectives or different domains. And what we found is that from an automation standpoint, there's still a gap around sound practices when it comes to requirements and design. There are some teams that have started to use techniques like use cases and translating use cases into requirements and automating that and so forth, but we haven't really come across any robust cases that scale. What we did find, however, from an automation standpoint, was tremendous emphasis and best practices emerging around development, testing, deployment, maintenance. And here we've outlined just a few of those activities. So you'll notice here that we've got, for example, automated code reviews. We do have input validation, and there are ways to automate how we can actually go in there and verify different cases around input. We've had automated functional testing for some time now. We also have automated deployment, automated monitoring, continuous monitoring, synthetic monitoring, those kinds of things. Now, when we looked at it from a security perspective, moving on to the second column, what we found is it's not as extensive as the automation perspective, but we still have at least one or two items in every part of the life cycle. So for someone who is focused on security, we do have some practices around security requirements analysis and creating these security policies. When it comes to design, we do have, using architecture type diagrams, we can actually determine data flows, untrusted boundaries, systemic thinking, which is really important, and so on and so forth, right down to testing, where we've got pen testing and things like that. Now, this is now where it starts to get kind of interesting. When it comes to compliance, we didn't really find a lot of best practices. And similarly, when we took a look at the software development lifecycle from a risk perspective, we found some initial risk assessment practices at the beginning of the lifecycle. But when it comes to testing, we found practices that really tried to map against compliance, but largely we're actually seeing a lot of gaps. So what we've done in this chart here is we've highlighted in green those areas where there's at least some kind of a best practice in place. And red indicates where there isn't really a set of suitable best practices at scale. Now, this is going to be important later on. And we were just initially trying to understand what are the assumptions that we're making just going into this assumption of scaling from DevOps to DevSecOps. This chart here gives us some data when we went and approached some very large organizations in the Fortune 50 range. And we basically asked them, what actually drives you to consider application security? And their response back to us was, first of all, we basically take a look at general risk management. And secondly, we want to take a look at compliance requirements. And this was surprising because if you remember from the slide that I showed just previous to this, we don't actually have a set of best practices for risk and for compliance. But this is what's actually driving application security with very large, complex organizations. So when we take a look at this particular gap, we get a sense that we are going to be in for a bit of a rough patch, at least in the short term, for us as a security community, as a DevSecOps community, as we try to scale DevOps from that project level and try to move this up to the program level. Here is the result of a survey that was from a recent Secure CISO conference, where the participants were asked, where does application security rank on your list of priorities for 2018? So this is for this year. We wanted to get a sense on whether or not application security still was important. We found from 2017 that it was important, but maybe something had changed in the mindset. And what we found was 76% of the responses really came back and positioned this as being either critical or high. What we saw from a year before was the number was closer to about 75%. So not a significant difference. There still is a high priority for application security. When we then went and asked the same audience, who do you think should be or is responsible for triggering the discussion on functional and non-functional requirements around software security? And the response that came back was about half of them said it was IT's responsibility, and about half of them said it was security. Now that's interesting because we didn't really see strong representation around risk or the compliance teams. Knowing that risk and compliance are what drive application security, when we take a look at how the requirements themselves are being derived, it's really coming from IT and the security teams at this point. Now, as a researcher, when we take a look at this data, it begins to kind of bring up more questions. So we thought that it would be a good idea, let's kind of dig a little bit deeper and find out whether we've got some kind of a bias happening in here. Are we missing something? Is there a different perspective into this? Can we go to a broader group to see what's happening over there? So what we did is we actually went and did a search on Twitter for DevOps, and basically we used the hashtag DevOps and just to see what are people actually talking about. There's a lot of discussion on agile, cloud, legacy or kind of mainframe applications, software, the web, but not much discussion really here around risk and compliance. So we thought, maybe what we're going to do here is we might actually be kind of picking the wrong area, the wrong population. So let's kind of dig a little bit deeper. Instead of DevOps, let's actually search within the DevSecOps domain and see what's happening over there. And so we actually went and did a similar analysis over a 7-day period to see what people were actually talking about. And here's what we found. Cyber attack, cybersecurity, DevOps, but again, not a lot on compliance, risk management, things like that. Um, so when we looked at this, we said, well, what if we were to take our focus and look at it from the risk and compliance side to see maybe that community is in fact trying to reach out to the technical communities, and therein lies some of the gap. So what we did was we basically went and did a search to find out what the risk and compliance folks were basically looking at. And here's what we found. They were really focused on compliance for sure, GDPR, governance, risk. But in this case, we're not seeing a lot of conversation around development or testing, things like that. So if we look at where the conversations are actually going, we've got two different groups. One group is focused really on trying to move projects forward, and we've got another team that's focused on compliance and risk. And these two teams aren't really conversing within a common area. So there's a gap that exists in here. So this is where questions began to emerge. Is this a gap around knowledge? Is this a gap around collaboration? Is this a gap that's introduced because of the tool set? Is it an organizational boundary that we're trying to kind of get over? So we're going to talk a little bit about what we've seen in terms of how teams are moving forward with this. So there's a question in the chat window I see here. How many were moving from DevOps to DevSecOps? So in our research, as we go and we talk to researchers, we speak to companies, we speak to thought leaders, we speak to a number of different people. DevSecOps is actually where it's at today. And a vast majority of people have already shifted their conversation from DevOps to DevSecOps. Just to give you some data points, I believe Gartner had published some research, and they said by the end of 2017, about 3/4 of organizations will have already embarked on a DevOps program. So it's actually become normative these days to talk about DevOps. And the next stage beyond this is how can we still continue to move with a DevOps mindset, but make sure that we're not slipping from a security perspective, which goes back to the first slide. It's sometimes DevOps moves so far ahead that the security component of it is actually lagging behind, and that's what we've seen. So I hope that answers your question. Please keep the comments coming. I'm more than happy to pause as we go through the presentation to basically address and answer any questions you've got. Use this as a learning opportunity. We're here to basically share our research, so feel free. Thanks for that question. There was a separate research team that actually went and did some analysis on the gaps that exist between security teams, the operations teams, and development teams. And what they found was between development and operations teams, the collaboration was actually the highest. Now, this is not surprising. As I've mentioned earlier, as an industry, we've moved well past initial discussions around DevOps. So we would expect to see that there have already emerged cross-functional teams. I'm not suggesting that it's always easy, but at least we have a good idea of what to expect and how we might begin to embark on a program to help with DevOps. I'd mentioned at the start of our conversation today that I'm a part of some IEEE working groups. One of them is the P2675 working group, which is actually focused specifically on trying to create this global standard for DevOps. So all of the kind of thorny issues that emerge from that are, we're basically trying to face that head on, and just kind of, seeing what we can do to kind of create a normative standard. When we look at this chart and look at the collaboration between development and security teams, it's there, but it's not that high. We have some very clear challenges there. when it comes to DevSec, we find that the challenges are primarily around skills, so developer skills training. Not only that, but we've also got people from the security side that don't understand how development works. So we've got that bridge that we need to bring together. We've got regulatory issues. We're seeing things like where development teams are expected to take a high-level policy and know how to interpret that policy as it pertains to some of the day-to-day activities that they've got to do from a coding perspective, and sometimes that's actually an unreasonable expectation. We also see gaps from a cultural perspective. It's something where perhaps there may not be top-level support to try and bring the security and development teams together. We find that there isn't funding because the priority is actually more on the development side to release things quickly. So these are some of the kinds of challenges that we're seeing in this space. Now, for someone that is really focused on trying to develop a security program, these gaps represent opportunities. What can we now do to basically shorten that skills gap that exists between these two communities? What can we do to help our developers understand and really develop with the mindset of compliance or regulatory standards? What can we do to create these centers of excellence to help propel through some kind of a champions program, a culture of security that exists throughout? We don't have enough time in just this one webinar to go and drain every one of those topics. But we're happy to have a conversation with you offline if you would like to engage with us further on that. But that's the kind of thinking that we're hoping will emerge from this. Now, when we take a look at operations and security, it's a little bit better than what we see between developers and the security folks. The challenges that exist there are just the vast amount of data that's coming in. And really, it's all about the analytics. How do we make sense of the data that's coming in? So in response to this, it's not surprising to see where the industry is headed, where we've got a lot of operational vendors beginning to inject things like pattern recognition or AI or things like that to really assist us and kind of help us try to make sense of all of this data that's coming in, because essentially the SecOps teams are just inundated at this point. And it's really, they need some way to help them scale up in their environment. What we have here is some data that we asked at that Secure CISO conference that I was mentioning earlier. We really wanted to get a sense of their confidence level. And really behind this question, if you dig a little bit deeper, it's a question of assurance. We've had the question of assurance now for decades, really. Even if you go back to like the early 1960s, I mean, we've had even, back in those days when we were dealing with, before this whole revolution around the microcomputer side sort of kicked in. But, are you 100% confident in your cybersecurity posture? And 85% of them came back and said no. So to us, this was a big red flag. Why is it that we have such a high degree of sort of a lack of assurance that we are in fact delivering software that is reliable, on time, and secure? So we've touched on a few of these things in terms of where we think the root causes of them might lie. But even when we have conversations with the regulatory community, I was just in a meeting earlier this week, and this particular topic emerged. What can we do to kind of help this community to kind of make sure that we are creating things from a security perspective? Now, regulations are certainly one part of it, but we're also beginning to see that there are other components of this related to customer demand, also looking at just maintenance activities, for example. Sometimes developing things securely can have a positive impact to make sure that we're not dealing with the heavy maintenance when something like GDPR or something like that suddenly comes up. Now, what this really comes down to when addressing this collaboration gap is we actually have three different groups here. We've got our security teams, we've got our risk and compliance teams, and we've got our technical teams. In this case, we're really talking about the Office of the CIO. Now, we've labeled it here this way because we're not focused at the project level here. This is really where we're beginning to talk about organizational boundaries. So we saw earlier that there's this lack of collaboration that exists between these teams, but let's systematically kind of break this down and see what's going on here. So what we've got here now is a subset of the competencies that exist within each of these business units. So our security teams, for example, would be focusing on AppSec and OPSEC, threat monitoring. We've got our risk and compliance teams that focus on compliance lifecycle management. They're looking at auditing. Definitely they have collaboration happening with the regulatory community. We're well aware of that. And then if we flip on the left-hand side here, where we've got the Office of the CIO, their competencies are really around Agile, DevOps, having to maintain a set of applications that may in fact be legacy. They may be using kind of waterfall methodologies and not really Agile. And all of this really within a framework where we've got cloud infrastructure, we've got on-premises, hybrid environments, and so we're really, we don't really talk much about having stuff that's exclusively cloud or exclusively on-premises. It's kind of about 2 years ago, we sort of just put everything together and started to talk about this from a hybrid infrastructure perspective. So we've got these three teams. Each one of these teams has a set of competencies that they're very good at. They've been building these competencies. They've got a roadmap. They've got plans for how they continue to excel in these environments. What's happening is the security, risk, and compliance teams essentially use existing frameworks and regulations and standards that are out there, like ISO 27001 or PCI DSS, so on and so forth. And they use these standards, regulations to basically create policies. So what they do and is essentially is once they've created these policies, their intent is to move these policies now into the technical domain. Now, when we look at it from a technical perspective, managing an organization like IT is actually quite complex. So what IT teams typically do is they govern themselves with frameworks like COBIT or ITIL. Those tend to be the top two that we regularly see. They're not the only ones, but excuse me, what we have here is the need to translate the policies now into IT governance frameworks. Thankfully, we've got members of our community who have taken this initiative, and they will, for example, translate or map ISO 27001 policies into COBIT. So we now have some way to be able to at least bridge the gap that exists between these security, risk, compliance policies into these sort of high-level IT governance frameworks. The problem is this doesn't go far enough. If you actually consider what our technical development teams are actually looking for, they really focus at the level of things like SQL injection or caching or identity access management for a web API. It's very low-level activity that they're really focused on. And so it's this last mile gap that's creating part of the problem. The assumption is if we create the policies, we put it through IT governance frameworks, these technical teams, after all, should now be able to go in and execute. But that's not the case. And this is where some of the breakdown is actually occurring. I was at a conference recently. It was actually an ISACA conference where the audience really largely was based on compliance folks, risk folks, and just trying to understand from their perspective how they found this approach of trying to get the policies down into development teams. And the common theme was it was very frustrating for them. They found that they would create the policies and find that the policies were not being adhered to. And so there was a lot of rework that was basically happening. So I kind of turned the question around and I said, well, how many of you have actually approached the IT teams directly? And actually, that was something that was kind of surprising to them. We had one person in the audience who had done that. And I did ask her, and I said, so what did you find as a result of that? And she was just glowing with just positive remarks. She said it was amazing. We found that the collaboration was much better. They understood what I was asking for. I understood where they were coming from. And so the intent was really to try and bridge this gap. And this gap is what we're calling the policy to procedure gap. And this is where we're finding the crux of this issue actually lies. When you're scaling from project level activities to program level activities, you can't get past this policy to procedure gap. So you're going to have to face it head on. Really, at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is proactive compliance in this DevOps world. So we come in, and when we talk about compliance, I use the term compliance in the sense that we've got security policies that are injected into the lifecycle. And basically, we've got teams that are now working within that kind of a framework. So it's not just regulatory standards, but it may also be internal security policies. So you'll notice we're not in any way advocating that you have to get rid of this deep tribal knowledge that exists. We were basically saying that every team must do that. They must develop their competencies. We're not re-engineering entire teams. But what we are suggesting is across the bottom that there has to be this collaboration, which in fact injects diversity across the security lifecycle. We can't have one team trying to interpret what they think security actually is. And what this comes down to is we end up with basically a questionnaire at the beginning. And out of that questionnaire, from our experience, it doesn't take long to create that questionnaire or to basically respond to it. But from that emerges a set of controls. And this is all about identifying what we need to push into our software development lifecycle. What we then do is once it gets into the development side, which now goes from the policy level and brings it down to the project level, we're now looking at application lifecycle management tools, bug tracking tools, code scanning tools, those kinds of things. And because of this integration layer, which gives us the proactive compliance, as the work is actually getting completed at the development layer, through this compliance layer that we're talking about, we can actually see which controls are being met and which ones are being missed. Similarly, as we move to the right of the lifecycle, when we get into testing and integration and things like that, which is where traditionally we've seen penetration testing, DAST, those kinds of things. The validation aspect of this is being done, and again, goes into this proactive compliance framework, into this platform, where as work is being conducted, we are essentially giving this information out to the teams that are focused really on things like compliance and security and things like that, which brings us to the right, where from an auditing perspective, at any point in time, it should be possible to go in and to extract what our security posture actually is from an applications perspective. Now, I do want to say that when we look at a framework like this, the intent is deliberate in terms of focusing really on the applications perspective. So the questionnaires are focused on the kinds of applications, whether they be legacy applications, applications that already exist, or greenfield applications, whatever they are, but essentially driving things through from that perspective. And so what we really end up happening is at the project level, we've got information radiators related to things like our velocity, burn down, those kinds of things. But when we get to the program level and we're focused on DevSecOps, this policy to procedure platform essentially radiates security-based information. And so while we've got development, compliance, security teams, and so on, really working collaboratively on this platform, they are essentially using the same tools that they've always used. But the integration layer with the policy to procedure platform enables this information now to get translated in a way that makes it useful to teams that are just beyond what we would deem to be traditional DevOps teams. Just to ground our discussion here, we this is publicly available information. PayPal has a very, very large team, and they've actually gone through the model that we're describing to you. There are other teams, large-scale teams, that have also done similar kinds of things as well. We encourage you to go in there, examine the video, see what they have to say. Really, they were coming in from the perspective of a large pool of distributed teams looking for in-context security requirements and helping to kind of push that through, and essentially coming up at the other end all the way to the right with an automated dashboard, which gave them a sense of how they were doing from a security perspective. And that pretty much brings us to the end of our discussion. Shane, I'll just hand it off to you at this point if there are any questions.
Sure. There was actually a comment earlier in the presentation about training being very important in DevSecOps programs. So wondering if you can expand a little bit on how training is important to DevSecOps programs.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I was at a conference recently, and I got the same question actually, and it comes up regularly. So training absolutely is important. You need two kinds of training. On the one hand, you need training that is focused on your specific domain. So for example, with developers, understanding things like SQL injection, understanding how to create secure web APIs, those kinds of things become really important. On the other hand, we also need cross-functional training. And this is where, for example, talking about a security program and what's important from a security program perspective can be very useful. And I would actually encourage that when we have this kind of training, don't think about limiting it just to a particular audience. Traditionally, we've done that, but I think that kind of amplifies part of the problem because we're just focused on that one core group of individuals, and so there's a natural bias that sets in. But by actually bringing together multiple people in the room at the same time, it opens up the ability to go in and start to talk about it from different perspectives. And really, whenever we're addressing challenges with a complex nature, we need to have both, right? We need to have the deep expertise, but we also need to make sure that we've got that diversity across the life cycle, basically. So that's what I would suggest. Yes, training absolutely is important. There are some clear metrics that you want to provide around training. Some organizations will provide training for compliance and regulatory purposes. I think we need to go beyond just kind of checking a box on that, but actually looking at, has this made a difference for us? Did we catch something else in production? What else can we do to improve our training? And really going in with that kind of a mindset. So I hope that the individual that asked that question did get a sufficient response. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to go deeper on this. We definitely have been speaking to educators even on this, and they've got some very strong opinions. We'd be delighted to share some of their thoughts and some of our thoughts on this too.
Great. Another one coming in from the Q&A interface. This one might require a follow-up. So the question is, with respect, this sounds like big design up front. So how does this enable DevOps concepts like single piece flow?
Yeah. Really, really important to understand. The intent here is not to suggest when we're dealing with the program to go big bang on something like this. It is enormously difficult to try and achieve that, especially because at the program level, we're really talking about some structural biases that exist organizationally. So what I would suggest is start with a team that has a champion that understands that DevSecOps and injecting security into the DevOps pipeline is valuable and is important. Find another group that is also interested in doing this. And then what we can do is we basically start to form the nucleus of a community of practice. Start to build that out. Start to get gradually more people involved. Maybe the testers now start to come into this conversation. And so what's happening is we organically begin to build this program out. It is important, in addition to doing this really from the bottom up, to have some level of senior support. I will say that. Sometimes it's important when it comes to trying to manage resources across two different teams, that you need somebody that's willing to participate and say, I think this is valuable for us. Why don't we go ahead and actually carve out some time for both of these teams to work together? And really what you're doing is you're scaling this out in a very transparent, organic way. How DevOps unfolds in one organization is going to be different from how it unfolds in another organization. We've spoken to some teams where it's pretty much green lighted all the way through and they were able to move very quickly. We've had other organizations where security hasn't been a part of their culture, and so they're just essentially starting out with a DevSecOps program. I also did ask this question to a number of people in some of our research interviews, and it was pretty unanimous in their response back. Don't try to go big bang on this. Have a very clear understanding of what you are trying to achieve, because people will ask you what your intention is. Measure this as you move forward to show that you are in fact providing value. These are all things that become really important as you scale this out. Now, I just want to throw something in here. Shane, you had alluded that this may be an offline conversation, and I think this is where that might come in. When we talk about metrics and we talk about organically growing a program like this, there is a focus on project level metrics in many cases, but we should not forget that there are also business level metrics. And what's important to the business at the end of the day, they're looking for things like resiliency. They're looking for things like cybersecurity risk exposure. They're looking for compliance, right? Those kinds of things. So whatever metrics we put together has to eventually map back or have a way of mapping back into those business metrics. Because at the end of the day, somebody is going to have to basically present and suggest why a program like this might in fact be important. So I'll just leave it at that, and I hope that that's at least enough to kind of get going for the individual that asked the question. Any other questions?
There's a couple more questions, and I think we'll have a follow-up on that one offline, because there's some further clarification requested that we probably won't have time for. But the question we can address now, we'll take two more. The challenge with policy, InfoSec policy, is really about the human mind and the inability to keep it all in mind. Is the best approach to build the policy policy items into the requirements design process or somewhere else? What is the best approach to take on this need?
Yeah. So this is fundamentally a shift left question. We traditionally have tried to bring policies in too late, typically at the testing level. Policies at the design level are important, but should actually happen before we even get into design. So we should be able to conduct an assessment up front to say, for the teams that are going to architect a solution for us, here are the policies by which you can actually govern the kind of architecture or design you're going to be creating. For the teams that have already created an application, what they can do is they could go back and reassess their existing architecture based on a similar kind of workflow, answer the questions, and based on the mappings of the policies themselves, based on what the organizational compliance level is, actually determine whether or not we are in compliance or whether there's still more work that needs to get done. I agree. It is a lot of knowledge. And so what we have found in our research with the compliance community, they're actually overwhelmed. They spend close to 3/4 of their time really working with regulators. Only about 25% of their time is available to actually do internal compliance work. And so this is a real challenge. There has to be some way to take those compliance policies into some kind of a platform so that we can scale this thing up, because as is, it's not scaling up efficiently, right? So this is that whole policy to procedure platform that we were describing, where it gets injected in. If a policy were to change, there should be, through the radiation that occurs in the platform, an immediate notification on what requirements from a technical perspective have in fact now not been met. And so we need to prioritize that and move that forward through the life cycle, coming full round back, knowing that we've actually closed the loop on those things.
Cool. Okay, time for one more question. What is the typical time for sufficient maturity, or what is the pointer of successes of a program?
Yeah, good question. So we also get this question quite a bit. And I will say that getting the program up and running is not difficult. What becomes really difficult is trying to permeate the cultural barriers that exist. So generally when teams are moving into Agile or DevOps, it usually takes them anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. And I'm talking about large organizations here. If we're looking at trying to create a culture where it's got an inherent mindset of security, and this is being done on a regular basis, I would suggest you're probably looking, just as much in terms of time. And so what you want to do is you want to actually build this up gradually. You want to get your champions. You want to implement your community of practice. You want to garner some wins. You want to demonstrate that this is working. And that's how you begin to win sort of the hearts of individuals as you move forward. That's been the approach that we've advocated. It's the approach we've seen validated with others that have done the same kind of thing as well. And engaged in DevSecOps kinds of programs.
Great. Thank you, Altaz. We don't have time for any more questions. There, my microphone is unmuted. Thanks, Altaz. We don't have time for any more questions. We're happy to follow up via email. So thank you again, Altaz. We really appreciate your perspective on these concepts.
Sure.
Before we close off the webinar, I'd like to let you all know about a free course that we just launched called DevSecOps for Managers. This online e-learning course covers some more practical concepts in how to set up a DevSecOps program, including an overview of some of the common implementations of a DevOps toolchain, kind of more of a project level view than what was presented today. So if you want to register for the course for free, just go to www.securitycompass.com/DevSecOps-training. Exceptional value here, and we're sure you'll get a lot out of it. So I think we can end this webinar. Another reminder that we'll send out a recording and slide deck to you all by the end of the week, and we'll also include a link to the free DevSecOps for Managers course. Again, please don't hesitate to contact us about anything. Also, let us know if there's anything you'd like to see from us in the way of webinars or other content. You can reply to the webinar invite emails, or you can email to info@securitycompass.com. Thanks again to everyone for attending this webinar, and we hope you have an excellent rest of your day.